to be pulled off working on daily news stories and to be given a month to investigate a cold case in an effort to turn a story and to try and solve it is really rare in our business. And
this is just one case of, you wonder how many dozens, if not hundreds, maybe even like thousands of unsolved cases across the country where there's family just waiting to get any word about what happened.
Hello, and welcome to my last takeover week of the Seriously Connected podcast. I'm Christine O'Donnell. I am the founder of Bright-Sided Podcasting. We produce podcasts, and we also create digital marketing content, and it's a lot of fun. On this episode, we do something completely different than you've probably ever heard here on Seriously Connected, but that's the point, is to try new things, and so that's what we did with this podcast. So Steve, my husband, Steve Kolodziej, journalist, reporter, joins me for this episode as we dive into the cold case of Kathy Kolodziej. This is a young woman who was murdered many years ago, and she went missing on November 2nd. So we are coming up to that anniversary. I had worked this case as a reporter many years ago, and I kept a stacked case file. And so in this episode, Steve and I go through that together. We talk about what goes on behind the scenes of an investigation like this from a reporter and journalist standpoint. I also entered into a correspondence with a serial killer, and we exchanged several letters back and forth as I was trying to determine whether or not he may have been responsible for murder. Here we go. Here's my episode with Steve Kolodziej talking about the cold case. Hello, and welcome to Seriously Connected. This is a takeover podcast for women in business. And guess what? I'm a woman in business. I am the founder of Bright-Sided Podcasting. We are a production company, and we also produce digital marketing content for our podcasts. And I'm taking over the podcast this month. My background's in TV news. I was a journalist for many, many years. Joining me today is a fellow journalist, Stephen Kolodziej.
Hi. I'm a fellow journalist.
Hi, fellow journalist. 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Steve Kolodziej.
I've got many leather-bound books with my name attached to them.
He's been on like all the night shows.
Yeah.
His goal in life was to be a Jon Stewart moment of zen. And I
made it.
Join us tomorrow night. Here it is, your moment of zen.
State and local authorities are trying new methods to urge parents to vaccinate their kids. KTLA's Steve Kolodziej live in Hollywood. Steve.
I'm going to the Oscar next year.
Years ago, Micah and Sheriff, the measles was virtually eradicated from the United States.
And actually, full circle moment, tonight we're going to see Jon Stewart.
Oh my gosh,
yes.
I can't wait. I'm so excited we got tickets.
I know, at the Palace Theater in Schenectady, is that right? Or is it in Albany? Albany. I'm thinking Proctor's. Mm-hmm. I thought I would take this opportunity, my last week of the Seriously Connected takeover, to try something a little bit different. And what I'd like to do is watch one of the news stories that I produced back when I was an investigative journalist. I have picked one because it's topical, news-wise. So Kathy Kolodziej was killed a long time ago. She was killed on, I believe it was November 2nd. This is the case file I have.
You
with
still
all
have that?
Of the information? Yeah.
This paper is over a decade old.
Yeah.
You got newspaper clippings, photos from the crime scene, everything. Wow.
Kathy, 17-year-old woman, SUNY Cobleskill student, was last seen at 1:30 a.m. on November 2nd, 1974, leaving a bar in Cobleskill, New York. Her body was found November 28th, 1974, in a field in the town of Richmondville in Schoharie County, New York. So it's an unsolved murder. I did a deep dive on this many years ago, trying to figure it out. I actually reached out to a serial killer. And
that was like a whole Hannibal Lecter, Silence the Lambs situation.
I have 3 letters.
Creepy.
But I was just thinking, like, we can look through them during this podcast. And because the date that she was last seen is fastly approaching, also the sheriff who had desperately been trying to solve this case, Sheriff Tony Desmond, just passed away. Mm-hmm. And the case still hasn't been solved.
Gosh, it's got to feel like a weight on your shoulders that you take with all the way to the grave, all these cases as detectives that they leave behind afterwards. They never get any closure to, especially the families.
Yeah. And I believe I interviewed one of her last surviving family members. And so this was 11 years ago. I did this story. I thought we could watch it. It's from back when I worked at News 10 here in the capital region of New York State. And that's where we live now. And so let's watch it together.
We're going to just watch it and analyze it. And
it's 2 minutes and 46 seconds. We'll talk about it, analyze it, and then we'll go through the case file. And perhaps someone out there listening might have something they want to share. You never know. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of really smart people who are interested in these kinds of things. And I know there's a Facebook community working to solve this case. Anyway, let's watch it.
All right.
Okay.
See, today I came up here and there's a white cross with I have no idea what that is.
For nearly 40 years, Sheriff Tony Desmond has come out to this field by McDonald's Road to check on the place. Investigators found the body of 17-year-old Kathy Kolodziej.
It's right in here. She was laid face up with her feet this way.
For the first time, investigators are releasing these crime scene photos from that day. It was Thanksgiving 1974 when Kathy's shoes were found along the side of the road. And then her red jacket spotted through a set of binoculars.
Why can't this guy get caught?
Kathy was from Ronkonkoma, New York, and came to SUNY Cobleskill to study horse husbandry. She was gone for just 60 days before she went missing. Her uncle, Charlie Sidlowski, spoke to us on behalf of Kathy's deceased parents.
I got a call from my sister, and she says, Charlie, she says, they called me from the school, and Kathy didn't come home last night.
Kathy and friends had gone to the Vault Tavern Friday night. Investigators tell us Kathy told the group she was going to meet up with someone and left. The Vault was the last place she was seen alive.
I had marked the spot.
Over the years, investigators have looked into a number of suspects, including serial killers Ted Bundy and Louis Lent, because they may have been in the area at the time. Bundy was executed in 1989. Authorities no longer believe he is responsible. Lent, however, is currently an inmate at Old Colony Correctional Center in Massachusetts. He's charged in the murders of 12-year-olds Sarah Ann Wood and Jimmy Bernardo. I wrote to him, and he wrote back. He writes, I know I lived in Central Florida for the majority of the 1970s. I don't remember ever hearing of Kathy Kolodziej. He continues to say, but I could be wrong. In 1973, I was working at Morse Chain Company, now defunct in Ithaca. I know that because I took out a loan and bought a 1973 MGB convertible. Either way, I had nothing to do with Kathy. In a diner just down the road from the place Kathy was last seen, the original investigators, including Sheriff Desmond, discuss the 38-year-old case, a murder they've never been able to get out of their minds.
But one of the things that I remember about this the most is Mrs. Kolodziej when she came to identify her daughter's body.
It's always been there, and always will be.
Somebody needs to pay for what happened here. And I hope I'm around to see them when they have to pay for it.
Gosh, it's a 50-year murder mystery where they have no idea what happened to Kathy. Just 17 when she disappeared, and that's wild to think because this happened back at a time in the 70s where there wasn't surveillance cameras on every establishment, on every corner, everywhere you look. People couldn't track your cell phone. You didn't know where your family and friends were at all times. You couldn't just text or call and say, oh, I'm going with this person. It was mostly just word of mouth and, knocking on doors. Did you see somebody? Did you not? That's rough.
Yeah. So a couple years back, not that many, maybe 2 years back, Anya Tucker, who is another journalist, reached out to me because she was also doing a follow-up piece on this. And I was just talking to her to be like, hey, do you have Tony's number? Could I reach out to him? And she was like, I'm so sorry. He actually passed away just a few days ago.
Wow.
I'm sorry if you didn't hear. It's very sad. He's a nice guy. He was such a nice guy, and he cared so much about this case. He worked with me so hard to get all those old investigators together. Like the same guys in the picture removing the body were in that diner with me. And a lot of what's in here is thanks to Tony. He just he just gave me all this information to try and help potentially solve it 11 years ago. She said, I asked her if she knew if they had made any additional movement in the case when she followed up on it. And she said, not that I have heard since my interview with him in 2022. He mentioned you when we talked back then. I'm going to send her a little smiley face.
Oh, yeah. You left a good impact, a good impression on the detective.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what strikes you? You now are a journalist working in this market. You knew me back then because we were dating long distance.
Ooh.
Do you remember me talking about this back then?
Yeah, this was a big story that you were really excited to be on the case of. You were getting together these detectives and you were corresponding with a known serial killer currently serving a life sentence. That's, got the makings of lots of different crime drama movies. It's just, unfortunate. The only thing you can really do is talk to the main players in the case, try to reach out, go to the previous leads the detectives had and, see if anything new shakes up.
Yeah.
But, unless there's DNA evidence that just comes to light these days, it's really difficult.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Anya if she had any, because she just did this 2 years ago. Did she have any surviving family?
I mean, I'd say it's a good chance if she was 17 when she disappeared.
Her mom had passed away.
Yeah.
That older gentleman that we just watched, that was the only surviving family member. And I don't know if he's still with us.
Yeah.
Right?
Any other family would be in their probably 90s at this point.
Ronkonkoma, New York.
90s. Yeah.
So I just figured maybe we could look through this and just kind of talk about what it's like to do this kind of reporting.
I mean, it's heavy stuff because a lot of these cases, I mean, they might be old, but when you go back to talk to the family, the relatives, even the detectives who work these cases, it's like you're reopening those old wounds, as it goes to say. You remember, they might not have thought about Kathy in days, weeks, months, and then here you are trying to talk about what was probably the most heart-wrenching day of their lives when Kathy disappeared, when Kathy's own mother had to identify the body of her daughter.
And I mean, I didn't see any of that. I didn't witness any of that. I just, so it looks like this was the main picture. We came up with a timeline. We had investigators talk murder mystery because they were obsessed with it. Eyewitness reports. We were looking for evidence. There was a reward. There's a tip line. The address of where she was last seen, the Vault Bar, which is 545 Main Street, Cobleskill. And her body was found on Cross Hill and McDonald Road in Richmond, New York. I mean, do you think that the killer is still out there?
I mean, there's a good chance the guy's probably dead. I mean, so many times. And this is 50 years ago.
You think it's a guy?
I mean, most serial killers, murderers are men. Just the way it is.
Yeah.
So,
What's
again,
with
this is 50 years ago.
Is it 50? Did
you
do
assume that, because this happened in what year? 74?
Yeah.
74. So we're exactly 50 years ago at this point in 2024. So that's when she disappeared. And so she was 17. I probably would assume her killer was at least that, if not older than her, probably a man in his early 20s or so, if it was the person that she was meeting up with. So that person's at least, late 60s, early 70s or 70s. And if he was in a life of crime, those people, it's not a very healthy lifestyle, so they don't live very long just due to health issues.
Being a murderer?
Yeah, that.
All right, we are going to take a minute from what we were just listening to for our hot take. And my hot take is about the Jon Stewart show and what it's like when you expect one thing and you get something else. You just heard Steve and I were talking about Jon Stewart and how we were looking forward to going to that show. And we went and I thought it was amazing, but I had no expectations. So here I go throwing Steve under the bus because he was let down. Steve was so bummed after the show. So the show was advertised as an evening with Jon Stewart. And Steve, who is a longtime Jon Stewart fan, thought that it was going to be like a fireside chat where we were going to get to know Jon Stewart on a more personal level and maybe hear about his life now and his family. Like he was expecting something very different than what happened, which was a comedy set that I thought was hilarious. It was so funny, relatable, awesome. I really had a great time. But because Steve's expectations were not met, it kind of not ruined, but it did take our date night in a direction that I was not expecting. But anyway, we rallied. We ended our night with McFlurries from McDonald's several hours later, and it was a very good time. But I guess my hot take is sometimes when, your expectations don't meet reality, there's a letdown. And when there is a couple who has to then navigate the letdown with the not letdown, I don't know, got to do your best. Manage your expectations on a date night. Manage them and just plan to have a good night. Even if you were let down, have fun anyway. Rally. And we did do that. But he bummed me out for 5 minutes. But it was only 5 minutes. It might have been an hour. But, rally for your significant other. All right, back to the episode.
What is it about the Kathy case that stuck with you for so long?
I mean, I spent like a month, I think, of investigating this piece. And to be pulled off working on daily news stories and to be given a month to investigate a cold case in an effort to turn a story and to try and solve it is really rare in our business. And so I was really lucky to have been given an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
It looks like this is 5 minutes long was my original script. Draft 1 was 5 minutes long.
They had to chop it down.
Here's my intro. Yeah.
I mean, just looking at these photos right here, it looks like it was taken like out in the middle of nowhere. Like, how did she end up there? Did she walk out there with a person? Or, I mean, it's more than likely she was just dumped out there. So how was she even discovered if it was so far out the beaten path?
Okay, here we go. Here is the report on 11/2/74. Hedwig Kolodziej of 2867 Chestnut Avenue, Ronkonkoma, New York, reported her daughter, Kathy, age 17, born December 7th of 1956. A student at the State University of New York, Cobleskill, was missing. Her body was discovered. So she was last seen on the 2nd. She was reported missing by her mom on the 7th, so 5 days after. Her body was discovered on the 28th in a rural area in the town of Richmondville, Schoharie County. Subsequent investigation determined the subject was a murder victim. Investigation continuing, consisting of leads and other agencies, other sources of information review, all teletype messages, all area arrests to date, no pertinent information developed. This investigation is being continued, case pending. So these are the Lewis Lent letters. I mean, what do you find the most interesting about this case?
Well, I'd like to hear what it was like corresponding with a serial killer. Why did you think reaching out to him might serve some sort of purpose? Just because he was known to be working in the area? I don't know if you could call it that, working, but selecting victims in that area when he was a free man back then?
I just was looking at the detective's list of suspects and I saw that he was on it.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, why not reach out? If he writes back, then it's interesting. I just thought to myself, if you're in prison and you're a serial killer, I just thought that maybe he would be bored and want to connect with something in this space.
Yeah.
And so I wrote him
I think a lot of those guys like to have pen pals. So, I mean,
just
that's
didn't know
something we
if he
could all
did.
start doing, is just talking to more of them.
I don't know. So I actually got scared, and that's why I backed away. I don't think I have a copy of the first letter I wrote to him.
Yeah.
And I just thought maybe he could help me understand
Like put yourself
the
in the mindset.
Right?
Just like in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
Were you a fan of that movie at the time?
Yes, I have always been a fan of that movie. So the first postmark here is December 29th. He wrote me back. Then he wrote me back again January 15th, then again January 29th. And it says on the back, this correspondence is forwarded from the Massachusetts Correctional Institution. I will tell you, when I first got this letter, I was freaking out. I could not believe he wrote me back. I remember like my heart beating faster. My body was like trembling. I could not believe that a serial killer, 1, knew my name, and 2, wrote me back. And 3, he is not a good guy. So I was scared of the contents of the letter. And I just remember being like, I wonder if I've cracked the case. You know, I wonder if somehow I could have found, like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I was absolutely incredulous.
It's like a window into the mind of madness.
And his penmanship is so nice.
Oh.
I haven't opened this. Okay. Dear Ms. O'Donnell, thank you for the Merry Christmas wish for me. I must have wished him a Merry Christmas.
That's very nice of you, wishing a serial killer a Merry Christmas.
I was writing him around Christmas.
Yeah.
I just thought maybe he was lonely and bored. I do consider myself a Christian, but like many, have only a spiritual interest in Jesus's birth. None really in the holiday as most people celebrate it. If you know much about me, you know that the FBI, is that the FBI? Lewis Lent Task Force investigated the 20 years of my life previous to my arrest. They informed me their results and conclusions and investigation take up nearly 600 pages. I was able to get the first 200 pages before 9/11 happened and found answers given to their questions by people I knew to be honest and accurate. I know I lived in Central Florida for the majority of the 1970s, and I don't remember ever hearing of Kathy Kolodziej, either in 1974 while living in Florida or any time I returned to Central New York in 1982, nor any time after that up to the arrival of your letter. The only 2 SUNY campuses I know the locations of are Oneonta, New York and Albany, New York. I've heard there's an agricultural college in Alfred, New York. Other than that, I know nothing of any other campuses. It would make little sense to me for you to want my perspective on possibilities in her case. There are many professional criminologists who could probably give much more helpful insights than I could. I'm sure the urge to get the point of view of a particular criminal is sometimes overpowering, as they have personal criminal thought processes you might think could possibly go beyond what criminologists might come up with.
Seems like he is a fan of Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal Lecter, too.
If that is the case, for some criminals, it has eluded my thinking. Every time I ever met with law enforcement people, it was apparent to me they had a much better ability to create possible scenarios of crimes than had ever occurred to me. It appeared to me they could have successful criminal careers where amateurs fail. So I think he kind of was trying to prove his own innocence in a way here.
Yeah.
I will ask my family to gather information about Kathy's case off the internet for me. I'll be glad to review what I receive and write to you concerning any thoughts I have on the crime. My only experience with speaking to an investigative reporter took place when I was at MCI Concord and was only allowed an off-camera interview. The reporter was allowed pen and paper only. If we correspond a little more concerning Kathy after I review the information my family sends me, and it appears a one-on-one supervised interview might be helpful, I'll give my approval, and you can work out the details with the DOC Office of Public Relations in Milford, Massachusetts. Good luck with your work. Sincerely, Lewis Lent.
Wow. So he was even offering a potential sit-down, face-to-face interview. Is that something you think you would have done?
Well, I wrote to him. I have 3 letters from him. And I was considering it, but I was getting very anxious about it because I remember him being like quite demanding about what he would and wouldn't say. And I felt like he was trying to manipulate me and control me. And I don't know, I started having nightmares about him. And I actually started taking some like physical, like fitness, like boxing classes because I just wanted to be stronger and be able to turn my body into a weapon if I needed to for some reason. I just remember feeling like really worried about it. And it got to a point where I felt like he was trying to make me do things for him. And I had to like just draw a line in the sand and decided not to pursue it anymore because I didn't want to, I don't know, I got scared.
Did you do a story on the letters he sent you?
No, the only thing I've ever shared from the letters is what was in
that story right there.
That story right there. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Now it is time for our serious business lesson here on the Seriously Connected podcast. And I've been thinking about this because there's a couple different lessons that I could share. First off, stay humble, keep learning, praise in public, critique privately. Like these are all like little lessons that I've learned along the way. But I think that one of the most important lessons I've learned is to just keep going. Like expect for things not to go the way you want them to, and just keep going anyway. Not everything is going to work out the way you hope, and that's okay. You will be surprised. Don't let failures take away your dreams. Just learn from your failure and keep moving forward. Persistence is so important no matter what it is that you're doing. As long as you keep going, it's like almost impossible to not get what you're looking for because you're going to keep learning and keep finding a way to make it work. Here's an example. A lesson I learned maybe a little too late in business is you're not looking to attract everyone to you. You want to also repel the wrong clients. If people aren't going to pay you what you're worth, they're not your target customer. Find a new target. And that's just the way it is. You want your offer to attract and repel people. And if I didn't persist in business, I wouldn't have learned that. And the more you persist, the more you learn, the more you grow, the more success you'll find. So just keep on going. If you're struggling, I feel you. It's part of the process. It's just part of life. So keep going. Back to the show.
Would have been interesting to hear his mind and thought process behind the other crimes that he was convicted of.
He says in one of the letters that he wasn't going to talk about his crimes.
Maybe he'd pull like an OJ, like I didn't do it, but if I did, here's how I would have done it.
Maybe he would have done that. But
yeah. You know, this is just one case of you wonder how many dozens, if not hundreds, maybe even like thousands of unsolved cases across the country.
Yeah.
Where there's family just waiting to get any word about what happened. This week in the news here in the Albany area, on Sunday, human bones were discovered near a pond in the town of Troy. And instantly people were thinking, could these be the bones, the remains of a 12-year-old boy who disappeared?
Jalik Rainwalker.
Yeah, Jalik Rainwalker. He disappeared back in 2007. We reached out to his family, his grandmother, and it was an interesting take from their perspective because there was no body ever recovered from this 12-year-old boy, Jalik. They don't know what happened to him.
Yeah.
The family's has assumed was killed. He died somehow. So when these bones appeared in an area where Jalik was thought to have been at one point, an area where just a couple of years ago detectives had searched thoroughly, thinking there could be a connection there. When those bones were unearthed, the family told me they were hoping it was him. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was interesting. It's you're hoping that your worst fears, Jalik is dead, but it seems like something they've already made peace with. He's dead. Now they just want to find his remains. It was almost like they have no hope of, or very little hope of, thinking that he's actually alive and just, escaped somewhere or was kidnapped somewhere and just living another life at this point. I mean, he was 12 when it happened back in 2007. So, he would be, coming up on 30 years old now.
I think it's a kind of grief that it's really hard to ever get over if you don't know what happened. There's no, it just for me, there's just this empty pit in your stomach that can never be filled. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that's how the family feels. And I think that with a case like this with Kathy Kolodziej, it's just kind of thankfully they found her body. So they know what happened to her, but they don't know why. They don't know who. There's never anybody to be taken accountable. So I actually imagine the Jalik case is even harder because he was even younger than Kathy. He was 13?
12 years old.
12, and she was 17. So
an update to the Jalik Rainwalker case. Those bones that were discovered near that pond in Troy were determined to not be his. But then that's a whole other story that's opened up.
Yeah.
Okay, if these don't belong to this boy, whose bones are these? Which missing persons case fits this mold?
Yeah.
Because there's so many. It's hard to believe. You stumble across a set of human remains and you have no idea who they could be because there are so many who are missing, and especially for them to be bones at this point, that leads you to believe it's been some time, years most likely, since this person died and then decomposed to nothing but their own skeleton. This is pretty dark, heavy stuff we're talking about.
It really is. It is. Well,
it's
the
always,
news business
It's always interesting, I think, when people, especially in the podcast side, get really into the crime stories and the nitty-gritty of some of these cases, because they're pretty horrible to think about.
Yeah.
One of the big stories we were covering yesterday was there was a murderer. A man was convicted of killing a 3-year-old little girl, drugging her, raping her, and then trying to cover up the crime. The girl ended up dying of her injuries. He was a family friend, but he just was sentenced to prison about 2 months ago. And 2 days ago, we found out he was murdered in prison. He'd been there less than 2 months. We talked to the police department, and they said, we're not surprised he had a hard time in prison, because that's how often other inmates treat people who are there for committing crimes against young, innocent children.
Yeah. I mean, we had my dad on the podcast, and he was a corrections officer for New York State's prison system. And I remember him talking. I mean, he talked about it a little bit on the show, but that was something he would talk to us about. Like they would have to put people like that in solitary, or else they would get murdered.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot more I have here on Kathy Kolodziej, actually, that I never talked about. It wasn't in my package. I could do a whole nother episode about it. I spoke to her friend Rita, who I have her phone number and her email for.
Yeah.
There were other family members that I have their address and phone number, and so, I mean, and not to mention all of those other investigators. So I guess my point of rehashing these stories is to talk about the life lessons that I've learned from covering the worst days of someone's life. And the reason I wanted you here is because you're a lot like me when it comes to, and you've been there for almost my entire journey as a journalist. We met our senior year of college in J school at the University of Minnesota. So, and I mean, the whole time I was a reporter, you were a reporter. And the whole time you were a reporter, I was a reporter. I thought, why not talk about what we've learned from these cases? And I think I learned that life is really precious, and to just love really hard, and to have a lot of fun when you can. And if that's every day, make it every day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I also get stressed out all the time. You know this.
Yeah.
But it's because I have so much. I put I put a lot of pressure on myself to try and make something of my life.
I think the lessons that many people should take away, just on face value, when you hear about these horrible, horrible stories, these crimes, I mean, as you mentioned, this story is multiple people's worst day of their lives. Finding out that Kathy, 17-year-old, was disappeared, killed. Somebody did it. They have no idea. So when you think about, my life is hard. How am I going to pay this bill? Or, I don't feel good. Or, I don't want to go to this event. Or, I got so much work to do. When you think about things like this, it really puts into perspective how little our day-to-day problems can be when you think about how awful some of these things are that are happening to people and still happening. And with this story, I mean, I guess you could say because it's an unsolved murder, it's ongoing for many of these people, whether it be the detectives or the family, the relatives, or friends.
I feel like there's this gift of perspective. That is kind of the gift of grief that comes with being a journalist. You get this perspective on life that every single person you meet is going through something. And so if you can treat them with kindness and a smile, or if they treat you poorly, if you could just think to yourself, they might be going through something right now and it has nothing to do with me. And so I'm just still going to move forward with kindness in my heart. I know it sounds so cheesy, but I think that is literally how I try to walk through life because of stories like this. Because there's a lot of bad in the world. So if you can't stop badness, but you can be good to people.
That was very nice. Thank you. And thank you for having me on. I'm glad we got to talk about this.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm sure there's more homicides and murder investigations we can dig into in the future.
Really?
Sure.
Do you mean it?
No. Yes, of course I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Steve. I love
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to end this podcast episode with a bit of a tribute, not only to the Kolodziej family, but also to the sheriff who has been working on this cold case and really hoped to solve it during his lifetime. His name is Sheriff Tony Desmond. I mentioned him earlier, and we lost him not too long ago. And I just actually am reading now an article from the Daily Gazette about him. So here's a quote that is from Sheriff Desmond, Tony, and this is how it ends in this article from the Daily Gazette, and I'll link this in the show notes. He said, "I would just like to say I've had a great career and great life. I'm going to continue enjoying every day after I leave here." I think that's something we can all strive to do every day. It's just enjoy it. Thank you for listening to my takeover here on Seriously Connected. And if you would like to connect with me, go ahead and find me on social media. I'm at the Christine OD. That's my Instagram account. And you can also look up my website at brightsighted.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you soon.